I suspect there aren't any kids out there who think smoking's healthy, right? And yet, back in the 50s, cigarettes were considered socially acceptable. Something like 80% of men smoked. Check out this ad for candy cigarettes for kids, and the caption, "Just like Dad." The realisation of the health dangers of smoking in the 60s and the subsequent banning of advertising for cigarettes, the taxing of tobacco products, and the rollout of hard-hitting and graphic awareness strategies such as these, that we all know very well, have made smoking socially unacceptable. And as a result, smoking and smoking-related diseases and deaths are on the decline in most countries. I suspect there are plenty of kids out there who don't realise that sugar can be unhealthy, and yet there are over 8,000 studies linking sugar to a range of serious yet completely avoidable chronic diseases, most of which begin in childhood. What are these diseases? Tooth decay. 40% of our 10 to 12-year-olds have decay in their adult teeth, and extraction of decayed teeth is the leading reason for days off school. Obesity. 1/4 of Aussie kids are overweight or obese, and there's a disturbing upward trend. The majority of today's children will have obesity at age 35 if we don't take action now. And obesity is the biggest risk factor for type 2 diabetes, a life-changing and life-threatening disease being diagnosed in 250 Aussies every single day. Now appearing in our kids as young as 7, a disease that not so long ago was known as maturity-onset diabetes. Although obesity is the biggest risk factor for type 2, there are now more thin, metabolically unhealthy people than there are overweight or obese, metabolically unhealthy people. Clearly, there's more to this than just obesity. What's causing this explosion of tooth decay, obesity, and type 2 diabetes in our kids? Our poor diet. Our poor diet is responsible for more disease and death than tobacco, alcohol, or inactivity combined. A diet that's packed with sugar. Table sugar, sucrose, is what we usually think of when we talk about sugar. And sucrose is made up of equal parts glucose and fructose. It's important for us to know there's another very abundant form of sugar, the refined carbohydrates, sugar in disguise. Products such as white rice, white flour, white potatoes, and the foods prepared from these. Refined carbs are virtually all starch. And starch is just long chains of glucose which break down into single glucose molecules when they reach the gut. In fact, this is a process that begins as soon as these foods enter the mouth. When you consume refined carbs, you are quite simply consuming sugar. Sugar and refined carbs are nutrient poor and non-essential. There's not a single biochemical process in our bodies that demands we consume them. And yet, they are the major ingredients of ultra-processed foods, what I prefer to call ultra-processed food-like substances. Unhealthy substances that make up 62% of the American diet and 50% of the British diet. I suspect we're in the same ballpark here in Australia with our own diet. Disturbingly, our Australian Guide for Healthy Eating, which is based on our Australian dietary guidelines, is packed with foods made from refined carbs, foods that are relatively high in sugar and also ultra-processed substances. Can this document truly be considered a guide to healthy eating? How does sugar, refined carbs, and ultra-processed substances cause poor health? It can lead to a condition known as insulin resistance. This is a complex metabolic process. Let's look at glucose first. To help illustrate glucose metabolism, I like to use Dr. Jason Fung's analogy of a subway train in Tokyo, where the train cars are the cells, passengers of the glucose molecules, and the conductors of the insulin. As soon as glucose is absorbed into the bloodstream, it triggers the release of the hormone insulin from the pancreas, and the insulin helps move the glucose into every cell of our body, where it's either stored or used as an energy source. With prolonged and excessive consumption of sugar, the cells start to fill up with glucose. The insulin level rises to push more glucose into our cells. However, a point is reached when the insulin can't push any more in. We are now insulin resistant. The resulting overflow of glucose is taken up by the liver and may eventually be converted to fat, which is then stored within the liver. Fructose, the other half of table sugar, gives sugary products their sweet flavour. It's not recognised as a food by the body, and when absorbed into the bloodstream from the gut, doesn't trigger the release of insulin. The majority of the fructose is metabolised by the liver, where it wields its toxic impact and independently gives rise to insulin resistance. The seed oils found in cooking oils and ultra-processed substances such as margarine can also directly lead to insulin resistance within the liver and a subsequent laying down of abdominal or visceral fat. Progressive build-up of fat caused by sugar in the seed oils ultimately leads to a fatty liver. We all know what a healthy liver looks like, right? Deep, dark red colour. Here's an image of a human fatty liver. It's yellow because it's overloaded with fat. In humans who consume excessive fructose, a fatty liver can appear within 2 months. A fatty liver is key to the development of obesity and of type 2 diabetes, which in kids can arise in as little as 2 years. And what do kids and young adults who develop type 2 have to look forward to? Decades of unnecessary medical appointments, crippling expenses, lost work and life opportunities, and a battery of devastating complications. Above all, blindness. The most feared complication of type 2, the one that I deal with every day at work. Diabetes can cause bleeding inside the eyes that can take away the eyesight in an instant, and sometimes permanently. Fortunately, eye disease due to diabetes is rare in kids, although it has been reported, and the damage can begin in childhood. Diabetes is now the leading cause of blindness amongst working-age adults in this country. Meet Neil Hansel, an everyday Aussie bloke who constructs light machinery for a living. Neil was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes at the age of 26. Unfortunately, Neil neglected his disease. He neglected his health, and he paid the price. A few years ago, at the age of 50, Neil went to bed one evening with normal sight. He woke the next morning blind, in both eyes, and remains blind to this day. I asked Neil the last thing he remembers seeing before losing his sight. Here's his response.
I should have kept my medication up, and I should have followed the plans that were given to me by my doctors. I woke up one morning completely blind. Thought I was dreaming, went back to sleep for an hour, woke up and I was still completely blocked off. My wife's face when we went to bed. That was the last clear image I had.
The second most feared complication of type 2 diabetes is amputation of a leg due to gangrene. Here's Neil in a hospital bed in March 2020. I took this photo the day after his left leg was amputated. In fact, it was Neil's 9th amputation over a 14-month period. He's also had 2 heart attacks, so type 2 diabetes is a deadly disease. It's now the 6th biggest killer in our society. However, if we understand that it plays a major role in the top 3 killers, heart attack, dementia, stroke, then type 2 may well be the biggest killer in our midst. Type 2 diabetes is also an incredibly expensive disease, costing our health system at least $20 billion every year. Treatment of the disease and its complications, as well as the loss of productivity in the workforce. And if we realise that diabetes plays a major role in hypertension and cancer, then the cost is likely many times higher. How did this all come about? Why do we have an epidemic of chronic diet-related diseases in our children? It's a long story involving religious ideology, corrupted science, and the might of the corporate food industry. A disturbing 150-year history that culminated in the release of the Dietary Guidelines for Americans in 1980. A guideline document that discouraged the eating of saturated fat and cholesterol. On no strong scientific evidence. In fact, on flawed and manipulated scientific evidence. And to compensate for the resulting lack of flavour and the ability of fat to make you feel full after eating, the carbs had to increase. This low-fat, high-carb dietary recommendation persists to this day across the globe and in our own Australian dietary guidelines. And what's been the result? Cardiovascular disease has soared, and so has type 2 diabetes. There's been a fourfold increase in type 2 globally over the past 40 years. And this rise has been even more profound in some countries and communities. In the First Nations people of Australia, there's been an 80-fold increase in type 2 since 1980. I have no doubt that a diet high in sugar, refined carbs and ultra-processed substances is driving this catastrophic epidemic, a diet that Aboriginal people have been encouraged to consume, a diet far removed from their ancestral way of eating, a diet that's highly likely to make them healthy and strong. Type 2 diabetes is also weighted toward lower socioeconomic areas. In Greater Western Sydney, for example, half of all adults over the age of 24 have either pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes. For the first time in our history, we are overfed but undernourished. What can be done to curb this rising tide of a disease that's a serious threat to our health system, indeed to our society? If we're going to call type 2 diabetes a dietary disease, then surely there's a dietary cure, right? It should be as simple as reducing our consumption of refined carbs, of hyperpalatable substances, and of sugar. It should be that easy. However, there are a number of factors making this a difficult goal for most of us to achieve. I call them the 5 A's of sugar toxicity: addiction, alleviation, accessibility, addition, and advertising. Let's look at them each in turn. Firstly, addiction. Sugar is highly addictive. It's been shown to be as addictive as nicotine. Sugar triggers the reward centre in our brains, leading to the release of neurotransmitters such as dopamine. They're what makes us feel good, what makes us want to do it again, and what gives us those cravings. Sugar is the only addictive substance, the substance that we willingly give to our babies. I came to understand the addictive power of sugar and ultra-processed substances only recently, and I'm a medical doctor. Once you're aware, it's impossible to put in place strategies to successfully reduce the amount of sugar in the diet, to detox from sugar, for you and your kids. The second A is alleviation. We often use sugar unwittingly to alleviate stress and make ourselves feel better when we're down. When we're anxious, the body is flooded with the stress hormone cortisol. The brain needs to balance the cortisol by releasing feel-good chemicals. Sugar does a very good job of triggering this reaction. Once you're aware that you're using sugar to alleviate stress, it's then possible to seek healthier options to activate your feel-good centre for you and your kids. Send them outside to play. Get them out into nature. Music is also a powerful trigger. How good do we feel when we listen to our favourite playlist? The third A is accessibility. Sugar is cheap and sugar is everywhere in our lives, isn't it? We're being tested constantly. We can't walk into most service stations without being confronted by a wall of confectionery. We can't check out from most supermarkets without our kids being enticed by 2-for-1 chocolate deals, all strategically placed at their eye level. A recent study has revealed that 30% of junk food is on sale in any one week in our major supermarket chains, and these price promotions are more common in poor communities. At school supply stores, parents have to run the gauntlet of junk food and sugar-loaded beverages as they wind their way toward the checkout counter with their sugar-addicted kids in tow. We can't even escape junk food at pharmacies these days. Are they really protecting the community? The fourth A is addition. An astronomical amount of sugar is added to our food and drinks. In fact, 75% of our consumables have added sugar. And this is particularly problematic and concerning in remote communities where cheap, ultra-processed products are in abundance and fresh and healthy foods are often expensive, in scarce supply and at times even out of date. And how about those nutritional labels on the packets of our food? I can barely read them, let alone understand them. And they certainly don't tell parents the amount of added sugar contained within. Australia has a health star rating system. A system that's flawed. Flawed because it's voluntary. At this point in time, only 30% of manufacturers are using the device. It's also flawed because a large number of ultra-processed products receive a healthy rating. This is a system that's been designed by industry for industry. And there are at least 200 different names for sugar. Here are 56 of the common ones. And he's serving to confuse parents even more, particularly when a label states no added sugar. Sugar is sugar is sugar. Even honey is 70% sugar. The final A is advertising. Our kids are bombarded by ads and TV commercials for sweet and ultra-processed products on a daily basis. And this has been going on for decades. The slogan, "Breakfast is the most important meal of the day," was coined in 1906 by John Harvey Kellogg to market his newly invented breakfast cereal, cornflakes. Over a century later, there is still no evidence to support his claim. Indeed, many of us will do better by avoiding cereal for brekkie. On free-to-air TV, kids are exposed to 3 commercials for unhealthy food and drinks every hour. On social media, teens are exposed to 100 promotions for unhealthy products every week. There's absolutely no escape. On their way to school, on their way home from school. And there are countless other tricks that the junk and fast food industries use to reach our youngest and most vulnerable. What can be done about this? How can we stop this preying on our most precious? No doubt there needs to be courage, visionary leadership and decisive action. I've come up with another 3 A's. 3 overarching strategies of awareness, accountability and assistance. Let's look at these each in turn. Firstly, awareness. Our kids and their grandparents, parents and teachers need to be aware of the health dangers of these non-foods. And this awareness, this vital education, needs to begin early, in those formative first few years of school, even earlier, during pregnancy. Glucose from the mother crosses into the blood circulation of the fetus. However, insulin does not, and so the child may be primed for a range of chronic behavioural diseases before they're even born. Breastfeeding is important in reducing the risk of chronic diseases in childhood. For those mothers who can breastfeed, the longer the better, to forge good metabolic health in our kids. And there's more good news here. Type 2 diabetes is largely preventable, but we must start with a comprehensive overhaul of our national dietary guidelines. A powerful but outdated and biased document that informs what's fed to our kids in hospitals, in childcare and in schools and their boarding houses. It also informs health practitioners, health educators and government health policy makers. South Australia's right bite policy for schools is based on our flawed dietary guidelines, so the policy itself must also be considered flawed. And most of us fear to stray outside guidelines or policies, even if they are flawed. We also need to take a close look at Australia's food pyramid. The old version to the right was diabolical, a dangerous device that promoted a diet high in cereals and refined grains. Even the new pyramid to the left encourages a carb-heavy diet and continues to discourage the eating of healthy fats. We need to celebrate the natural saturated fats in our food, fats that have been demonised for over 50 years, fats that are critical to health, to our survival. Fats such as those found in unprocessed red meat, eggs and full-fat dairy. Healthy saturated fats that are not associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Perhaps my food diamond provides a better guide as to how we should eat. Enjoy foods containing healthy saturated fats from both animals and plants. Minimise highly refined cereals and grains, high sugar fruits, starchy vegetables and heavily processed deli meats. And avoid ultra-processed substances and unhealthy fats such as margarine and vegetable oils. There's nothing wrong with that old meat and 3-veg dinner. Type 2 diabetes was rare in our grandparents' era. We also need to be aware that type 2 diabetes is potentially reversible. If your child had life-threatening cancer, the first thing you'd want to know is whether the cancer could be put to remission, correct? In fact, it's your right to know. It's also your right to know that their type 2 diabetes can be put into remission, that the humiliation and destruction that accompanies this insidious disease can be avoided. The simple fact is there are proven dietary methods that have been shown to put type 2 into remission. And now over 100 controlled clinical trials to support the fact that a low-carb, healthy fat diet works to both prevent and reverse type 2 diabetes. Once again, we need to flip our eating pattern on its head, shifting from a high-carb to a low-carb pattern with a good dose of healthy fat. Our next overarching A is accountability. Accountability of businesses and industry to do the right thing by us. Businesses who prey on our kids' addiction to sugar, who know that kids are hardwired to love and seek out sweet things. Businesses and their industry allies who flood our environment with junk food and sugar-loaded drinks, who make it impossible to escape the lure of sugar, even if we want to, especially if we want to. And schools are by no means innocent. They need to review what's being sold in their tuck shops and canteens by private contractors, and what's being served in the dining rooms of their boarding houses. And they need to find other ways to raise funds for sports equipment. There are many, many healthier options. And sporting clubs need to find healthy, real food sponsors rather than rely on the always eager fast food and junk food industries. After all, even our kids can't exercise their way out of a bad diet. Businesses and industry must also account for the amount of sugar they add to the products our kids are consuming. Make it abundantly clear how much sugar lurks within, and not to baffle parents with unidentifiable alternative names for sugar. Even many artificially sweetened beverages have been linked to chronic diseases, and they maintain our kids' addiction to all things sweet. Above all, our government needs to be held accountable. Our flawed health star rating system needs to be overhauled and the industry influence removed. It was a relief to see that orange juice has now been downgraded to 2 stars. How can a drink with as much sugar as a glass of cola possibly receive the healthiest 5-star rating? Encourage your kids to eat the whole fruit rather than the sugary juice. Nature has packaged the poison, fructose, together with its antidote, fibre. As well as filling you up, the fibre in whole fruits slows down the absorption of the toxic fructose component. Sadly, there's still a long way to go. And perhaps this is the gloomy future for those soft drinks in our fridge. The same fate that ultimately awaited cigarettes. And our government also needs to rein in the rampant marketing juggernaut spearheaded by the ultra-processed food and sugary drinks industries. After all, 70% of Aussie parents want their government to step in and protect them from the predatory marketing of unhealthy products. And finally, we need assistance. Each and every one of us. Doctors need assistance. To have the education, resources and funding to manage kids with diseases such as obesity and type 2 diabetes. Teachers need assistance. To have the appropriate tools and training to guide our kids toward a healthier future. Parents need assistance. To know the very best foods for their kids to thrive. And there's plenty of resources out there for parents, teachers and schools. And Aussies from every walk of life should be able to afford fresh food, real food, healthy food, to reduce their risk of developing devastating diet-related chronic diseases. And we humans do care. A recent international poll has shown that the thing we care about most in life is our health. Type 2 diabetes is an all-encompassing disease that impacts the entire family. Here's Neil Hansel again, with his wife and grandkids.
To Papa, you are the best papa in the world, and have a happy Christmas. Love from Anya.
We need to see more hard-hitting TV commercials such as Neil's story on free-to-air TV and social media. As an eye specialist, I never want to see another person go needlessly blind due to their diabetes. As parents and teachers, we can't afford to turn a blind eye any longer. Write to your school principal. Write to your local member of parliament. Join a movement. It's time to set our precious kids on the right path to an Australia that's free from type 2 diabetes. Thank you.